Hello, my name is Aaron,
And my name is Amelia.
and we're going to give a introductory presentation on how to use Microsoft SQL Server 2014. So let's get started. Okay, so our first topic is going to be how to log in and connect to SQL Server. Now our tutorial is going to assume you've already installed SQL Server on your machine. If you need help, there are plenty of tutorials online to do that. So to connect to SQL Server, so when you first log in, open Microsoft SQL Server, it will give you a window that will ask you for some information. And you have to select the server type, server name, and authentication. And just leave server type alone for now. And in server name, you will need to select the name of your computer to begin with. And later on, if you're going to connect with a remote server, you have to type in part of that server's connection string. But for now, just select the default that you set up when you installed it, which should be your computer name. And then for authentication modes, there are two primary forms: Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. Windows authentication is just a good default for now. It works well on your individual machine, and it works if you don't need individual user accounts. SQL Server authentication is needed if you're connecting with a password, and if you're doing any kind of remote connection, then you definitely need to use SQL Server authentication. And so I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like real quick. And so I'm already connected, so I'm going to disconnect the Object Explorer. So this is the window, and here are the different servers I've used recently. This one is my local machine. Now I can use this SQL Server authentication or Windows. I'm just going to use Windows because it's simple. So connect, and this just once again explains the differences between Windows authentication versus SQL Server authentication. Alright, topic 2, reasons to use a database management system. And so this is really discussing the differences between using something like Microsoft SQL Server versus just having your code executing queries and running everything separate from it. And so basically you have easy access to a lot of the options of your database, such as changing settings and easily creating tables and viewing the data. There's lots of online tutorials for basic tasks, troubleshooting. It's easy to tweak a value or property. We're going to show you later how to set things like auto increment and index and other values, and it's an easy way, kind of as a process of discovery, to learn how different database management systems work. Because if you're used to MySQL and you're moving over to SQL Server, the syntax for things is a little different where things are, so it's a good way to discover it. It's also easy to rebuild your assets with scripts. If you are refactoring things or you screw up your database with a bad query, you can have a saved script that you made, copy and paste it into a query window, and then execute it, and it will rebuild everything for you. And this last one, it's kind of cop-out, but if you don't know SQL yet, or if you're uncomfortable with it, you can avoid it somewhat by using some of the built-in properties here as you're learning, so that makes it helpful. Alright, so our next topic is how to create a new database.
So the first thing you want to do is, in the database drop-down table, you're going to want to hit right-click and hit New Database. You can name it whatever you want, preferably something so that you know what it is when you go find it. Something simple as our tutorial. And so you just hit OK. And then it won't show up at first most of the time, so you're going to have to refresh the screen, which you can do by right-clicking Database again and hitting refresh. You're going to need to use the refresh button a lot, and so it should show up right there. And then if you want to view the script, you can just right-click that database and hit Create Script Database As, Create To, and New Query Window, which opens up this window, which has all the script that this database has in it so far, which I believe most of this we've discovered is unnecessary, but some of it is. So then once you have your database set up, our next topic is you're going to want to create a new table. So on our tutorial, you expand the menu by hitting the plus, and then under Tables, right-click and say New Table. And then the table menu will pop up. It'll give you options for things like the column name. So if you're doing, say, a student database, you can do student ID, and then it asks you what the data type is. So student ID would probably be an int, and if you're setting this as the primary key, you want to get rid of the nulls. So you just go through and set various fields, so first name, last name, etc. And then once you're done with that, you can set one to be the primary key. So if you want the student ID, we're going to fill in the table quick. So say all we want is first name, last name. So when you want to set something as the primary key, you right click and say set primary key. And then it'll put a little key icon next to that field, thus telling you that this is the primary key. And then there's settings down below that you can change if you want to give it a default value or a binding value. So if we wanted the default value to be like 0, then you can go in and change it later. So in the column properties, you can do things such as set a default value or auto increment, and the auto increment you go into identity specification and double click on is identity, and that'll change it between auto increment or no auto increment. And then once again, once you've set all your values and given the table a name, which you can do in
When you save the file, you have
or
to enter
saving
a
the
name.
file makes you enter a name. So you can call it student, and then refresh the table, refresh your tables view, because you're going to find it doesn't like to, well, sometimes it'll show up, but most of the time it doesn't like to show up. And then once again, you can right click, say view script table as, create to, and new query editor window. And then it'll just pop up with the script, and it shows you things such as their identity or their student ID field, the first name field, the last name field, which ones can be null, which ones can't be null, if they have incrementation, if they have a primary or a default value, etc.